But it's okay. We can get through this without supplementary images, I suppose. Hi, I'm Laura, and I am a potter and an illustrator, and I have found a way to incorporate both of those loves into one great medium. That's how when I found ceramics, I found it in college, and I was coming at it from a 2D perspective. So when I think about things now through pottery, I think about it in that 2D perspective. So applying printmaking and other, attractive or, devices. So here's an example of some of my pottery that I've got up here. I use a combination of, I'm going to list off a combination of the stuff that I do in a piece, in my main body of work. So each piece is hand-pinched with coils of red clay. I use high water earthen red, and then I form it and add the foot, add the handle, and then I burnish it with terra sigillata, which I have a little bit of it here today to demonstrate. Then I use colored slips, underglaze, and then biscuit, and then I do an inlay, a black underglaze inlay after it's been bisqued, and then I use a mayalika on the inside, and then the areas that have underglaze and colored slip have been individually painted with clear glaze. So there's this balance of raw clay and glossy surfaces. And in addition to that, I also use some of the Amaco watercolors, but I don't have any of those with me today. And Amaco pencils. They're colored pencils. I really like those. And is anybody going to NCECA? Okay, well, I'll be demonstrating with Amaco in their Amaco booth at NCECA. So I have this is a scheduled events. I'll be there Wednesday and Friday demoing at their booth. And super exciting that the conference is so close and that, being in the midst of it will be really exciting. But anyway, so what I have prepared here is just a bone dry pot. So I let all of my pieces get bone dry. So the important thing about terra sigillata is that it has to be applied at bone dry, or it has to be applied at bisque wear. But when my piece is bisqued, I can't do all the fun stuff to it. So I opt to just do everything at bone dry. And that is, working with bone dry clay really sucks. It really sucks. I've tried decorating at leather hard and then waxing and then applying the terra sigillata, to see if that made it any easier, but it doesn't. It's just the simplest way for me to do this is to just wait for the piece to get bone dry and then go to decorating. And how I do that is, so once I make the piece and it's been decorated, it's gone completely bone dry, I do one layer of terra sigillata. So with bone dry pieces, you don't want to stress it out with water or liquid because then it'll just crumble in your hands. You're impacting the structural integrity of the piece when you introduce a lot of liquids. And so at home, I actually have a dipping setup, and I just dip the whole thing because dipping gives you a smoother a smoother coverage. If you paint it on, you get more brush strokey coverage. But brushing's fine. Like it's fine to have that application. But I've used this method for actually since I graduated from college. I graduated in 2018 from Western Carolina University, and I learned how to incorporate terrasigillata into my work from an artist, Mark Arnold. He was a Pittsburgh-based artist, but he recently moved to Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So he's pretty local now, relatively. And so I learned that technique from him. I assisted one of his workshops, and I learned a lot. But yeah, the terrasigillata and what was I saying? Oh yeah, and yeah. So yeah, I've done this since 18. I don't know how to do math. Anyway, it's been a minute. It's been I've definitely had my trials and learning how to not break. When I first started doing this, I had so much loss. Like I would pinch 20 cups, but only end up with maybe 2 or 3 of them because I would be too impatient. Working with bone dry pots, I would either be too impatient and like hold it for too long in the terracage, or be too fast and not let each layer dry in between. But now I've like figured it out, and I've got it pretty good to where I haven't, I've had less loss. I don't want to say the ratio because I'm afraid if I say the ratio, then it's gonna I'm gonna jinx myself. So let's just say I've had significant less loss with each batch. And each batch that I do, I have a pretty small kiln at my home studio. I live in Youngsville, and I have a Scott 614. So it's probably about the size of it's probably smaller than that glass cube. About that size. I can fit, in the interior is definitely way smaller than that. I can fit about 8 glazed cups about this size pieces. So 4 on one road, 4 on the other. And so my batches are in 3-month spans, and in 3 months I can make 30 pieces. When I'm pushing myself, and one time when I did have to push myself, I did 40 pieces in 3-month span, and that really sucked. But yeah, on a good period, 30 pieces in a 3-month span is good. It's a good goal. Well, that's because I do, roughly 10 at a time, because you're always wanting, there's so much waiting and patience involved. And I'll get to that. So the way that I figured out how to use terrasigillata and work terrasigillata in the way that works for me for decorating, because when you're working with slips, underglazes can be applied to bone dry work just as fine. Bone dry, bisqueware, underglazes are fine on any surface. But slips, on the other hand, slips are like attachments. You want your slip to be relatively the same wetness as your pot. Same as if you're doing a handle. Ideally, you'd be applying slip to a leather hard pot. Same as you're wanting to apply that handle to a leather hard pot. But I don't have that luxury, and of course I make things complicated for myself. I work in with bone dry. But, like I said, I figured it out. And how I do that is I have 10 mugs. I let them all get bone dry, and then I dip them all once, in the morning, and then the next day I'll dip them again, get a second coat, and that'll kind of be it for the dipping part. And then as I work on a piece, so I'll probably at a time, so the next day I'll probably work on 2 to 3 pieces at a time. And each time I go to work on a piece, I'll just kind of like rehydrate the surface with that 3rd layer of terra sigillata. So I do 3 layers of terra sigillata. And finally, you don't want to go too thick, because if you go too thick with the terra sig, it has a tendency to want to kind of like crackle a little bit. And sometimes, you want that effect. I find it happens more with white terra sigillata. I actually have not had a lot of great results with my own homemade terra sigillata because I get a lot of cracking. But the red is just way more easier to make because of that iron. The iron has a lot of flux in it compared to a whiter clay body. So I just find, again, I just find red clays and red iron oxide to be a little bit more forgiving. And also I would generally work with red clay, so the red just really makes everything pop. But I like using a really fluffy brush that can hold a lot of moisture. And for that 3rd dip, I'm just, rehydrating the surface.
What is that made of?
This, the terra sigillata? Oh yeah, good question. So terra sigillata is 3 ingredients. I'm specifically using Pete Pinnell's recipe. Pete Pinnell's Lip Smack and Smooth recipe. Pete Pinnell is, and he has pretty much mastered terra sigillata. He has a really good white terra sigillata recipe. He is just kind of like a master of clay bodies. You're familiar with John Britt, and he's kind of the master of glaze chemistry. Now, Pete Pinnell is the master of like clay and clay bodies. He's a professor from, oh my God, I keep getting my eyes mixed up.
He is Javier.
Yes, I know he's Javier's professor.
At
Nebraska. Okay, it's not an I. Sorry, I just get all the Midwestern states all mixed up in my head. But yeah, and yeah, Javier was another one of my peers at Western Carolina with Matt. While I was an undergrad, Matt and Javier were in grad school, and that's how I met Matt. And I was really pleased to learn that he lived in Raleigh when I moved to Raleigh. Anyway, I just kind of like, as I'm working on one, I'll move to another one.
Did you say those are already burnished?
These have already been dipped fully once, so that's why I'm comfortable brushing them. But anyway, sorry. Terra sigillata. Terra sigillata is a combination of pure clay, so any type of clay, some type of deflocculant, and water. So a deflocculant makes water wetter, essentially. It's something that you add to, like slip casting, slip. It keeps particles suspended in the air. And what we're trying to suspend is those fine particles. So terra sigillata is a refined clay slip. And yeah, so terra sigillata is a refined clay slip. And it's found in the those fine particles. So how I make my terra sigillata is I get a really big clear container. I specifically use I think I got it from Target. It was like a dog food container from Target. It's got a lid, kind of like with a hinge, and it's tall like a trash can, but it's clear. And it's like 20 gallons. No, not 20 gallons. That's a lot. That's as much as my aquarium. How many gallons of water is it? Oh, it's like 3 gallons of water. And I have a marking, you know, my clear container, and then I have a little Sharpie where I've measured it out once. Probably why I don't specifically remember, because I measured it once and I was like, I never want to think about this number again. I really hate numbers. I'm dyslexic. It's hard. And so I have that marking, and then it's 14 pounds. I know it's 14 pounds of. I use the Cedar Heights, the red clay, and then you put maybe about a teaspoon of Darban. And then and you just mix it all up, and you let it sit for. I like to let it sit for 24 hours, a full 24 hours, up high. Gravity, you know, gravity's doing its thing. So I don't, rather than having it on the ground, I try to put it onto a table. If you have one of those hydraulic lifts, those are freaking great. Where all you have to do is just like pump the foot and it just like pumps up for you. Those are awesome. And you let it sit for 24 hours after you've mixed it all up, and then you let it. And then I like to mix it again. After 24 hours, I just like to go through and mix it again. Get in with my hand, break up any clumps that I feel, and then I let it sit again for another 24 hours. And then it's ready to siphon. So when you go to siphon it, what you'll see is 3 distinctive layers. The bottom layer is going to be like this thick, sludgy clay. That's where all of the, you're suspending all the fine particles. So the heavy particles have all just suspended at the very bottom. So gross, sludgy clay. Unfortunately, all that clay is waste. You can't really use it for anything. I have been saving it though, because I'm like, I'm going to try and use it in some slip casting, maybe. But honestly, it's so, there's like deflocculant mixed in it. It's like deflocculant, a really high concentration of deflocculant and those heavy particles. And it feels like corns, feels like oobleck. It's honestly not that great. It's not a really great slip casting material, but I hate seeing all that it go to waste. So anyway, I save it. Haven't actually tried doing anything yet, but I've got like 2 years worth of 2 years worth of saved. Also, not to mention my piles of reclaiming. But anyway, sludge, and then the middle section is the actual terra sigillata. So I would say, middle section is the terra sigillata, and then the very, very top, very tiny section is going to be your water. So what I like to use is an aquarium vacuum. That way you don't actually have to put your mouth on a tube. I used to use a tube a lot, and I would also eat a lot of clay at the same time. Because if you have to siphon, you're sucking up clay. If you're not fast enough. But what I found is the aquarium vacuum is like perfect for siphoning out that sidge in the middle layer. And it's okay if you get a little bit of water, because really when my fresh batch of terra sigillata is actually pretty thin, but I just leave the lid off for like a week or so and let it thicken up a little bit. But yeah, and that's kind of the basics of how you make terra sigillata. If anyone's interested, I'll send out. I have I'll just send out the presentation that I have. And I also kind of have a handout. And I can just email that to the group. But it has a list of all my recipes. The terrace gelato recipe, my slip recipe, and my glaze recipe. Unfortunately, I think my glaze recipe has really worried in it. So I'm sorry. I'm also going to have to figure out a new glaze. Anyway. And so, okay. So I've applied this third layer, but I'm actually just going to kind of hit it again really quickly with another layer. Because I want to burnish this while it's still a little bit damp with my hand. So you see, right now it's too shiny. When it looks like you've just like sprayed it with water, that's too shiny. But once it loses those really glossy parts, that's like perfect for burnishing. And the cool thing about terrace gelato is all it needs is like your hand. You don't have to use a stone or anything to burnish. But I'm just really going in there. And you can already see it's kind of like shining up a bit. And the main reason why I got really, I went really head first with terrace gelato, and I love using terrace gelato, is because I'm just trying to chase after the salty textures that you get in a salt or soda kiln that I don't have access to anymore, or regular access to. As soon as I did my first wood firing, I like completely fell in love with it. And fell in love with the reduction firing process and any alternative firings really. Just completely fell in love with it, and just the textures specifically that you would get from soda firings. And I knew, that I would eventually lose access to a soda kiln, and I wouldn't always have access to a soda kiln, so I was like, how can I recreate those same, satiny surfaces, in a oxidation atmosphere. And at first I was hand burnishing with a stone all of my pieces. And that was fun and all. There's something is really meditative about hand burnishing a piece with a stone. But then I got into like different washes and stuff like that. But then as I read more about washes, like the Guernsey borate can kind of, it can be pretty toxic to your elements. And I was like, well, that's kind of not the point. I don't want to do that, So then I found terrace gelato and was introduced to that on my first INSECA trip when I was in college. It was in 2017 in Portland, and it wasn't Mark Arnold. It was actually Dita Murr, who had gave a demonstration at the Portland INSECA, and she used terrace gelato at that point, and I was like, oh, that's what I want. That's how my pots to feel. Because I never really liked the way a fully glazed surface looked. I felt like really distracted from my illustrations when the whole thing was like super glossy. It was also incredibly annoying to take pictures of.
So you don't put any glaze on the outside of that?
Only on the areas where the slope is.
So it seals it?
Yeah, so you feel free to pass this around. Okay, so this is pretty good. I feel pretty good about this. It's, can y'all see the sheen? Okay, it's got a nice sheen to it. I feel really good about it. It's also like, it's now cool to the touch now. The surface is just hydrated enough to where I feel comfortable really going at it with some slip. And when it comes to surface design and surface narratives, I'm really drawn to, my style is very inspired by early 2000, late 90 animation. Specifically that period, you know, I think of like Don Bluth and those animators. Let's see. I'm like, I don't know, like Courage the Cowardly Dog. That's the stuff that I like remember growing up watching. There was just so much color and so much movement and all of those scenes. And I remember in high school, I also got really into, for some reason, I mean, I thought I wanted, I don't know, I thought I was going to go into like an animation kind of route, but then, you know, I was like, okay, no, everyone was telling me I'm going to do marching band and be a music educator, and so I went that route. I kind of went the route everyone kind of told me I was doing, anyway. But then, so I actually went to Western Carolina with the intention of majoring in music education, not art at all, but kind of on a whim. The 2 weeks before I was supposed to, the 2 weeks before we were supposed to move in for band camp, I called the director and I was like, I'm changing my major to art education. I'm dropping out of band. And I hadn't even started yet. And I kind of like came to that conclusion at like a gas station. And it was like the first time I had a, you know, come to consciousness sort of moment in my young adult life. Anyway, that was fun. Then I did art education, and then I wasn't really feeling that, so I switched to graphic design. Really wasn't feeling that either. And I was like, well shoot, I guess that's what I would have been doing if I went the animation route. And I was like, well, I'll try studio art and printmaking. I really like printmaking. But I actually hated the idea of working with clay, because I never really had a good introduction to clay, I would say. In high school, it was kind of like a 1 week topic. You know, pull the wheel, our instructor would pull the wheel out for a week, and we'd play with it, and then everything would blow up. So I really wasn't looking forward to it. But my professor and, you know, the grad students and everything like that, they were very encouraging, and I was like, huh, there's like a family in clay. I was like, I really want that. I really want the passion that everyone has in clay, which is something I didn't see in any of the other mediums that I was studying. Everyone's just so in love with it. And then I got it, I understood. Okay, what I'm doing here is I just applied, I like to apply like a good 3 layers of slip. And this is kind of like my gesso, or like my priming surface. But, you know, I'm working on red clay, so can't really have bright, you know, bright and vivid underglaze colors with red clay. Excuse me.
So the terracing doesn't like resist the slip. There's not like issues with that when you rubbed it.
It does.
Finish.
Not with clay, because it's all clay.
Yeah.
The only thing it has an issue with is glaze.
Okay.
Whenever I'm done with a piece, I kind of sponge off the inside if I got any tear residual on the inside. Because you can see, for example, here, I'll pass this one around. This is actually, you can see the edge. I didn't wipe the edge fully, and the glaze didn't adhere very well around the edge.
Is it food safe to drink? Is it food safe?
The glaze.
Yeah.
The terraces. Oh, I just put it on the outside.
Just enough.
Just on the outside. You don't want to put it on the. It's just because it's raw clay.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually seal. So terra sigillata does mean sealed clay, but that doesn't. There's kind of like a misconception that it actually seals the clay, and it doesn't. It was actually terra sigillata was actually a method invented, I think, in Italy, and they would actually use terra sigillata in pottery that was, I don't know if I have this right. I'm trying to remember. It was something to do with like family sigils. A lot of pieces were made for families, and terra sigillata was used on those specific pieces. There wasn't a lot of surface painting. It was mainly just reliefs coming up from the clay, with the terra sigillata just enhancing those designs in the Italian pottery. So yeah, it doesn't actually seal the clay.
Do you make your own slip?
I do.
What do you, how do you make that?
So there's two ways. There's two ways I do it. I do have so the recipe that I do have, it's called a poor man's porcelain slip. Although it does have G200 in it. G200 EPK. Yeah. So there's.
Your ball fight.
No, I think, yeah, G200, EPK, silica, and it's all equal parts. I actually can't remember what the fourth is. What's the fourth? Yeah, I can't remember.
I think that's what I made.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's like, oh, 4. And
Oh,
I couldn't get G200 anymore, so
Yeah.
then I switched to those. I can't pronounce the name of what I switched to, but it's doing fine.
Yeah. No, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Isn't it like you got your ball clay?
Yes.
It's EPK, G200, OM4 ball clay, and silica.
OM4, yeah. That's right, because OM4 is also what I made my white terra sigillata from, because I already had it on hand. Yeah, so it's a super simple recipe, but yeah, G200 is pretty, like, you have to have a substitute for it. This is actually, I made a really huge batch. I'm still working on a batch from 2020. So that's been really nice. And I actually had Ceramica mix it up around that time. When was it, 2021? Yeah. So they're really great about that. But anyway, I do, again, I just do three layers on both sides. And I try to work relatively quickly, because I don't have a lot of time before my surface kind of loses some of its hydration from that initial brushing of the terra sigillata. So I have to work generally fast. And also I found, like, if my slip, if I'm not working fast enough and I get distracted and I don't carve while my slip is still hydrated too, it actually turns out really bad. It'll crack too. So I kind of have to, like, work fast in all scenarios. So with my slip, with my terra sigillata, with my carving, and that's why I only work like 2 to 3 pieces at a time in a given day. Okay, so I feel pretty good about that. And I'm just gonna quickly lay down some colors. And this is how I kind of just. And I keep all of my underglazes in this silicone ice cube tray. It just keeps it easy. Because sometimes, so I also instruct and work at the Pullen Arts Center. So this just makes it really easy for me to carry everything around when I have to do demos and teach and whatnot. And so with underglaze, you know, it also needs like a good 3 layers or so. And also another thing with the slip, if I'm not paying attention and if I start applying the slip too thickly or too close to the edge, I'll crack my rim. So I've learned that too. With working with bone dry pots, you just have to be both patient and efficient. And that's a really hard combination to learn, you know, to become efficient, oh my God, efficient and patient. It's difficult sometimes. Okay. And then on this side,
Does your underglaze dry a lot faster because your surfaces are bone dry? Do you find like just your 3 layers you have to wait a long time between the layers, or does it seem to like really soak in and
yeah, so actually because I'm keeping, you know, I hydrated that surface and then I added on that layer of wet slip, it actually kind of dries like the perfect amount of time, like not too slow, and it doesn't dry too fast. Like this right here, you know, I did that 3 layers and it's still kind of wet to the touch. So that's why I'm working on this second side. And so I like, you know, I'll just work around the piece. Until all my layers are drying. That's great. I also, because I keep it in this container, I kind of like keeping my underglaze thick too. I kind of like when the underglaze dries out a little bit and gets thicker. Sometimes, you know, I don't want to wait to have to do 3 layers on something. And so when it's thicker, I could just apply like 3 globs of something and that'll be it. Or, you know, just a glob and it'll be fine. Not necessarily 3 layers. Like this pink, it's pretty thick. So it doesn't really need a full 3 layers. Just maybe 2. So this is some flowers. And I also, the really great thing about the underglaze is that you can layer it, and color theory does, you know, help. Color theory does apply, thankfully, with underglaze.
So you're saying you can mix them?
You can mix them. And sometimes I either mix them on like a palette, or I just mix them like straight up on the pot. So here I'm doing like a little snail. But I'm doing like an underpainting in this yellow for the snail. Even though the snail's going to be different colors, I'm just doing an underpainting. So I actually have an underpainting with white and now yellow. And I have 3 different yellows in this ice cube tray. I have kind of like a light yellow, I have a brighter yellow, and then I kind of have their newer color, which is called Nectar, which is kind of like a goldenrod-esque yellow. So I really love working with, different temperatures and kind of just mixing them together. Okay, so I can see this area is starting to get dry, and as soon as I see an area get dry, I want to go ahead and like, even if I'm not finished with this, as soon as I see this area start getting dry, I want to start carving. So I have a couple of different carving tools. One is this cake decorating tool. So I've seen, this is like an official cake decorating tool from this is from a really nice set that I found at a thrift store. The Wilton, that's like a really nice cake decorating set. And it's like a hard plastic. I bought a cheaper set of these similar cake decorating tools because I was like, what if I lose this? I need to have a second pair. But the cheaper one, like the tip is so flimsy, but this is not flimsy at all. And it is my favorite, one of my favorite sgraffitoing tools. Because I can take it on the side. It's got kind of like these burrs around the ends. And it's got a really nice tapered point. Whereas, if you try to carve with like a needle tool, you're going to get a lot of really nasty burrs and boogers, and it's like doesn't create a very satisfying line. Another tool that I like to use is a ballpoint pen. Ballpoint pens are great. This ballpoint pen made to look like a pencil, but it's a ballpoint pen. And a really great. Yeah, this was my grandma's. I got this from my grandma's house, and I think they used to give these out as like little goodies, because this is for like an air conditioning guy in my town, in my hometown. Anyway, I don't know why it has an eraser on it, but it is a ballpoint pen. Like, it still works too. Anyway, a ballpoint pen, because I really like the bullet shape of this and the alignment it gives. And it also just kind of feels pretty natural. Another tool that I like is this wire stylus. I like this particular wire stylus because of how thin the wire is compared to there's another wire stylus out there, and it has 2 ends, but the wire's a little bit thicker, and it doesn't create as thin of a line as I like. And the next one is this this ball ball stylus, and I really like this here. It actually kind of does a combination of like what this. It does a combination of what these two do. So this gouges, in a sense, but it creates a very nice thin gouge. Whereas this kind of pushes the clay around in a sense. And this actually does both. This does like a gouging motion, and it also pushes the clay around. So depending on how dry my surface is will determine what I start with. So this is pretty dry, but it's, you know, it still has some temperature to it. So I'm gonna go at it with my plastic. Actually, no. I am gonna go at it with my wire stylus for these petals first. When I'm going around, I also find when you're working with bone dry work and you're working with two different materials, so either slip and underglaze, what can happen if you're using a blunt tool like this ballpoint or any of these rather than a gouging tool, you could accidentally peel up your underglaze. So your underglaze will want to peel off of the slip. It's not going to want to like, or you can encourage, you know, the ballpoint will encourage the underglaze to kind of peel up, which is really weird. But if I use a gouging tool, at the same time, I'm burnishing those edges, if that makes sense, and just really locking it in. It's the same as when you're doing your handle and compression. Compression is really important when you make a handle and you want your handle to stay adhered and not have a crack or show any of the seam. You want to go through and compress, you know, your connection points. So the same thing for this concept. I'm wanting to compress where my underglaze and my slip meet, so it doesn't, you know, start cracking. And then, you know, I can get more creative with my lines and line texture. These create like different textures. Okay. So I've created my initial like design here. So now I feel more comfortable going in with something like this to kind of clean it up. Because I have underglaze on top of slip, if I'm careful enough, and that's why I like using the plastic tool for this, because again it has those kind of like it has kind of rib tapered point to it. I can, at an angle, I can go through and scrape away that top layer of underglaze. Even though I was, you know, I kind of applied it pretty messily, you know, and it was really just, it was like a planning stage. But I'm just going through and scraping away that top layer of underglaze.
So you're erasing.
Yeah, I'm erasing. And then, let's see, if I accidentally went too far, I always add a little bit more. The white. Okay. So I feel pretty good. But now I'm going to create my border. I really love working within like these like little comic book frames. There's something really satisfying about that for me. And so once I've created that frame, kind of go back. Actually, I'll go with this tool. And I'm kind of doing a hard erase here rather than a soft erase. And when you're doing this, I've also at this point, I've learned you got to be really careful with your bow dry piece. Because if you're carving and you're like, you know, bearing down too hard, you could definitely just like snap your wall in half. But so this is the aspect of printmaking that kind of comes into play. So sgraffito, I think of sgraffito as like carving a linoleum block. And I kind of like it when the edges are a bit messy, because it reminds me of that relief print woodcut style. So yeah, I'm just going to go at it, and then but at the same time, because I've already done all my lines, I don't really care. I could probably go back to this, start working on this side, because since I've already done all my lines, I'm pretty much done. All that's left is erasing the rest of this border. And I don't have to worry about preserving any shapes or colors. It's kind of like when you score, yeah, it's kind of like when you score something. Essentially, I've already scored this frame here. So if this slip were to get too dry, and when I'm carving it wants to pop off, that's fine. I just don't want that to happen while I'm carving my initial design. So that's why I'm trying to work super fast, because I don't want any of my slip to pop off while I'm, you know, being kind of rough with it and carving through it. Because again, you know, you're working with bone dry pots, and there's this tedious balance that you have to find between, you know, the moisture level of your slip, your terracid and all that kind of stuff. But once I've gotten to this point, I can breeze on through. I'm going to the next stage. Sometimes that's what I'll.
Can you hold it up so we can see what
sure.
you've done?
Yeah. So I've made my initial. Yeah. So I've made my initial carvings, or at least the outlines. And later, when this is like fully bone dry and everything's, you know, dry, I'll just go through and clean up the rest of that edge. But I want to not forget about this side, because this side's getting pretty dry, and it's like a tedious dance you have to do with your pot. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll do all of my base colors and base layers and then quickly do a carve, but then not do any of the cleanup until the very end. Anyway, but this needs another layer. This needs another few layers of underglaze, and I'm gonna go. Bright yellow, shadow there, and an orange shell. And then I'm going to do my last layer here with a little bit of that golden rod. I'm kind of mixing some of my greens together. To create like this shadow. another orange here. So I have 3 oranges, 3 yellows, 3 different shades of, so 3 different shades of yellow, 3 different shades of orange, 3 different shades of green, and like 6 different shades of blue. So I'm gonna kind of add some shadows here.
So these like flower petals on the bottom of your bowls, did you use the same process to do that with the white underneath and then the underlays on top of that?
Yes, yes. And that was I actually tried out something, that was where I tried out the waxing. This one I haven't carved, this is a good example of where I've carved, and I'll go back later and clean up the outside. But that is a situation where I tried waxing and then carving and then doing while they were leather hard. And then I was going to try and do the terra sigillata later, but that was just way too much. It's just so much. At this point, it's a lot easier to just work bone dry all the way. And I actually didn't like the way, you can actually see here, or maybe it's on this piece right here, you can see that the wax is kind of like peeling off in weird areas. Yeah, you can touch on it. And so if I were to go and dip that in terra sig again, it would just completely ruin the whole thing because the wax is peeling off.
So the idea is that because it's waxed, you could dip it.
I could dip the whole thing and not worry about ruining it. But that was a failed experiment, and I'm just going to keep this. I'm going to stick to what I'm doing. Yeah. Okay. So this one, because this is, I just freshly applied, that I feel pretty confident about. Actually, no, I'm going to add a. Kind of light. Okay. I'll wait for that. I'll wait for that later. I guess I can kind of carefully work on this later. Okay, so I'm going to come at it with my ballpoint tip. And the thing with this ballpoint is that it's actually not cutting through all the way to my clay right now, which is fine, but just something nice to point out because it creates different line weight, you know, when it comes to doing the inlay. Yeah, here, we can pass this around. When it comes to doing the inlay, it's kind of nice. If you look around some of the stars, the black inlay creates all these really nice textures. Depending on which tool that I was using, and depending on how deep I went or how shallow I went.
So the jar was just the white slip?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you put clear glaze over the white slip?
Yes. So I put clear glaze over just the slipped areas and the underglaze. I like switching. Sometimes, you know, I like switching in between a bunch of different tools. Again, because I'm trying to create different textures and different line weights. But yeah, really my go-to is kind of always the stylus tool.
So on this is the black part, did you outline that with like a little teeny to get the black? Or was that part of an underglaze layer that you scraped away later?
Yeah, so that's that's the black underglaze inlay that I do after it's been bisqued. So once it's been bisqued, I paint the entire thing in black underglaze, and then with a sponge, I wipe it away. And that leaves kind of like a nice patina over the whole thing. And especially where I've carved, you know, it leaves those different textures and different line weights.
And then your last thing is the clear glaze.
Yeah. Sometimes I might go back through with my underglaze and add a little bit more color, or shading. But yeah, generally my last, yeah, it's when it's bisque, all I do is the inlay and then I clear glaze.
It might be in there.
So if you mess up, you have to scratch it all off and go back down to the white.
Yeah, that's a good question. If I do mess up, I usually try to like just work with it, or if it doesn't work out, I will just go through and scratch it all out and start over with a little bit of the terra sigillata and then the white, the underglaze. In the very few cases, in some cases, I'll like go through with a metal rib and have to scratch the whole thing away if it like just does not work. Or if I really like mess up the composition or something like that. And then I just kind of have to like start all over. I have to I'll wait for the next day for all of this to dry, and for everything to go back to bone dry. Yeah, bone dry. But yeah, I really like this because it's basically like one of those little mud tools, but in a stylus form. Because that nice plastic.
Like a yellow.
Yeah. I would say it's like a, well, more like a green. More like a green rubber rib.
You could use Marcus.
No, I'm saying, like, go to the bakery section, and there's so many good pottery tools in the bakery section. I'm sure, yeah.
So you're working at 04, 06?
05.
05?
Yeah. 05. Used to, I did this at 03, just because it was in my little kiln, and I didn't have access to, like, you know, bigger kilns. And I was firing in that old building. And it made me nervous to take it any hotter than 03. But now I fire everything to 05.
Does terra sigillata only work for low fires?
No.
It just depends on the clay you use?
No, it looks good. I've used the same exact recipe at Content at the reduction firings we do at Pollen.
And it same?
Yeah. A white sidge looks really good at Content too. And also in like pit firings. of course. Although with pit firings, the white sage is very susceptible to cracking off. Just because it's like not getting hot, I think it's not getting hot enough at pit firings. Because it's not wanting to like fully adhere.
Have you ever put the terracage in like salt or soda?
I have not. I actually haven't done. I haven't had a chance to participate in an atmospheric salt or soda since I started this process. But I really want to. So if anybody knows where I can participate in a salt or soda fire, let me know. I would love to. Okay, and yeah, and I'll pass this one around too. And I'll show you a good example of when I'm passing this around. It's kind of going to be really hard to see, actually, maybe. But this leaf here, so this leaf here, I had started carving it, and instead of actually carving it, it popped up off me because it started drying out too much. I kind of like forgot about these two leaf areas. But it worked out fine. Kind of, sort of. It kind of did pop off near the very end here. But when I pass this around, you can kind of like look at it and see that.
So what causes it to pop off? Because there's a layer of terracage in between, or because it's dry?
Yeah, the moisture differences.
Oh.
Yeah, so again, it's like if you're attaching a handle to a bone tripod. Yeah, the shrinkage. So I'll pass this around, and you can kind of, so when I pass this around, when you're looking at it, this side, all I need to do is just kind of finish up the whole border. This side too, I just need to start cleaning up the whole border, and you know, I can kind of start doing that with this one right here. And also when I do this, I try to wear a mask because I'm working with bone dry stuff. And I'm like, I actually bought these nose filters. It's kind of silly, but it's not. It's not, because health is not silly. But it's these little filters that you put into your nose. It's like a 3M filter. Huh?
It sounds like your cigarette filter.
I know.
Yeah. It kind of looks like this.
Probably be way cheaper than
Yeah.
Cigarettes.
A cigarette.
Yeah, but then there's it's essentially but that with like a little plastic nubbings. And yeah, you just stick those in your nose, and as long as you're not like inhaling it, like when I'm by myself, I'm not talking and do try to breathe when I'm working in the studio, but yeah, the nose filters have like really come in handy when doing this.
So you can still breathe.
Yeah, you can still breathe. It's like, I don't know. I'll also try to send a link to those when I send out this PowerPoint to everyone. But yeah, I would suggest, and I guess I'll just send that link. But they have a package of multi-sizes so you can find your size. Because there was a lot of different sizes. It's like, I didn't know people's noses could get that big. But there is some pretty big nose sizes. Oh yeah.
Big old Italian nose.
Man, I think I'm pretty. What time is it? What time is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll start passing.
Oh, the little part
Mhm.
chipped.
Yeah. When it gets dry, it wants
It's
to
got
chip.
too bright.
So yeah, I definitely try to do all of my initial line work while it's wet.
You haven't like ever tried like mist?
Have you got it?
I have actually tried misting, but I find that when I mist, I smudge. So that actually used to be my go-to, was misting. Because I used to just dip all 3 layers of my terracage first, and then try and decorate with misting. But then I would be smudging my terracage and then smudging everything, and it just wasn't working out. But I found that doing the first 2 layers, or, doing the first 2 layers like first, and then brushing before painting, just really helps when I'm wanting to decorate this way. But if you're working with, just, if you're not trying to like create really intricate designs and stuff like that, you can simply, I think I would always suggest slipping at leather hard and then waxing over with like a good wax. My wax, I guess, does Forbes wax like expire? I don't know. I've had my same bottle of wax since college, so like, I don't know if that's still good. The other thing that I was going to try and demo, which I don't know if I have time for, which is another process that I like doing, and this is what's demoed here, are my monoprints. Monoprints and underglaze transfers.
Yes.
But I have like a little example here that I can probably quickly do. What I like to do is I actually have, and I totally forgot about it. I think it's at home. I think I left it at that studio. But I actually have a little newspaper print pad, and I'll just go through with like an underglaze squeegee, and I'll just do a bunch of drawings in that. And then all you need, but this is going to be a monoprint, and you can save them for later. The really nice thing is that like underglaze specific, not slips. Slips kind of like iffy about this, but with underglaze, you can like save it for later on a piece of paper, and it doesn't really crumple up that badly. So you can save. This is a really nice thing with that.
How many layers?
This is 2. So 2. This is kind of. I guess this is kind of like a running theme. I do 2 before my last layer before I'm about to work. So with the terraced gelato, I do 2 layers before, and then 1 layer right before I'm about to paint. This I do 2 layers prep, and then when I'm about to apply it, I'll do my final layer. And I like using one of these really thick brushes for this. And I have, this is kind of like, I like doing that first full demonstration on my red clay, but with my white clay. This is what I like doing with my white clay. And okay, and so basically what you're doing for this is you have your little slab of clay, ideally without any texture on it. You've rubbed it with your rib, all that good stuff. You've done your final layer of underglaze. It doesn't have, see how these little bits kind of shine there? You don't want that. You want the piece to kind of be in this suede area of wetness. So it's not too wet, but it's also not completely dry, you know? It's kind of in this nice middle phase. So when I touch it, it's not really going anywhere, but if I were to smear it around, it would smear. So very lightly, I'm gonna put it on my little slab here, and very lightly, I'm just gonna draw into my newspaper with a blunt end. And it kind of creates like this nice peeled paper effect. So you get like these cute little transfers, and these are called monoprints. So this is kind of like, this is the positive and this is the negative. And so I could take another one. Oh, here it is. And this is a beauty blender, but beauty blenders are really great for pottery tools as well. And I just kind of like soak a bunch of water in it. I just get it really wet. And I'm just dabbing the whole, I'm not rubbing, I'm dabbing. And it's kind of like a temporary tattoo, you know? And I'm kind of burnishing. Oh my god, I tore it. Oh well. Burnishing a little bit too hard. But either way, if you don't go right through it, you can get like a nice positive and negative result. So that's kind of what this here is.
So
And
what,
this as well.
what stage with the little round pieces at?
These are leather hard.
Okay.
So these are like
You still
not
put a
too
little-
hard, so I didn't like really bend it. It's got some cracking to it. But I could, well, I guess I could retouch this. This is little loafers. So it's got some,
A little more, or a little less than leather.
yeah. It's enough that I can be rough with it and not like, yeah, worry about messing it up. And typically what I like to do with these is that I just kind of like cut these out with like little cookie cutters. And then I'll take some foam or something. I'll just use this. And just kind of like, yeah, shape it into like a little bowl. Something. Like these are just that same method. But anyway, that was gonna be my second demo.
And you did it, you got away with it.
Any other questions?
So when you drew on the back, you just used the blunt, the end of your paintbrush?
Yes. Yeah. Just any blunt end is fine.
Does that have to get the different colors in the far one?
This one right here, this is done in, I can explain this one real quick. So this one was done in layers. So this is another kind of like printmaking tactic, is you kind of have to think backwards. So you do your line art first, your black line art first, and then your highlights, and then your shadows, then your base color, no, your details. So for example, I've got blush here, you know, got a little bit of blush on the cheeks, and I added a skin tone after the blush, so your base color after the details. And then you add a background color, so that was the green.
So you do all that newsprint?
All in newsprint. And then this red here is actually a glaze. So at Halloween, this raspberry glaze. And it's just clear on the inside. This was actually a demo I did for one of my students because they were wondering what wax did to a glaze. And so what I did was I dipped the whole thing in clear, and then I just waxed around the sky, and then I dipped it in raspberry. So this outer edge is actually a mix of raspberry and clear with just the
Which you did after this.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
did the other, you missed it, and then you did it.
And then I glazed it, yeah. But yeah, underglaze transfers are really fun because you can, like I said, if you have underglaze and a notepad, you can like do them on your couch.
So how many layers of each color do you do? Like, I feel like when I do it, I'm maybe too thick or something, and then it's flaking off. And
Your underglaze. I honestly, for these, I'm just doing globs. I don't really do a full 3 layers.
okay, so you
Yeah, I'm just doing globs on these, actually.
do you let it dry
In between. Let it dry between each layer. And also another thing with transfers is you want to keep it to the middle of the page. Does that make sense? So if you have a transfer and you take the slip all the way to the end, that's kind of it for your page because it's going to buckle. Once you bring that slip to the outer edge, it's going to want to buckle in. So I see for this, I didn't, I kind of kept within the perimeters of like had a good margin. So I always say leave, and that last layer is when you want to go on the outer edge of your whole piece or your whole transfer. But yeah, you can color it. I have, like I said, I have a newspaper pad that I just got from like the Dollar Tree, and newspaper is the best. Copy paper, a no-go. Copy paper just deteriorates. It deteriorates so quickly when you're trying to burnish it and add water to it and try to dab it. Like it'll completely disintegrate. But newspaper works the best. Magazine paper is good. It's just there's some magazines that are more high quality than others, so you kind of want to be on the lookout for that. Because if it's more of a glossier surface, it's not going to want to adhere as well. But newspaper, I've found, is like the best medium.
Can you use stroke and coat equally in this same process as you can with an underglaze?
I've
With
not
this.
tried that before. I don't have a lot of experience with stroke and coat.
When you say you can like take your pad and just do designs in it, does that mean that you can do all of the like forward to back design work and then wait to do that last layer where you transfer it?
Yes,
Okay,
you can
so
do that.
Wait right before.
Yeah, so as long as you're keeping your design, not going to the outer edges, it'll keep. And if you're using underglaze, I find slip will crack. Slip is best to use as that last layer.
So you can use underglaze as the last layer.
But you can also use underglaze as the last layer. But slip, slip tends to like spread off. It doesn't store very nicely. I guess you need to be careful, but But the underglaze is for, as long as you let each page dry, you can keep them all stacked up on each other, which is nice.